Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of Condoland, which is now what we're calling our podcast. Today's guest is Richard Pearlstein, owner at Northcan Property Management. Richard has been the owner of Northcan since 1985 and has been managing condos since 1977, well before most of us were doing this as a career, before some of us were born. Richard started his company the year I was born, so it goes without saying, but today's conversation is going to be about the history of condo management and what things looked like um, prior to the new Condo Act, prior to technology being what it is today. Richard, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. And it's been a long journey. And I can remember working in rentals. And I started off as a garbage man, hauling garbage up because at one time they used to incinerate garbage. But then they had the compactors and laws changed. I graduated from rentals into condos back before condos knew what it was. I had a great teacher because I worked for a developer and they were just building condos. And they said, "Oh my goodness, let's try this condo industry. We'll find out how we can sell our condo so we can get our money out faster." But everybody in condo management started off, "Oh, maybe we could go back into rentals. I don't know. Let's try this new thing called condos." And at one point, I was a condo developer manager where we had to develop the property management end of this new thing called condominium management. It was a journey that I enjoyed, and there was a lot of fun because people didn't really understand it and new people were moving in. But it started off in the rental business.
Well, it's interesting because I've got some older buildings, but at a certain point in the past, they stopped being condos, and you had a wave of co-ownerships for a while, and then before that, yeah, everything was rental. Um, and so you're right, you're kind of making it up as you go along and figuring out what this industry looks like, and that's crazy to someone practicing this today because we were inundated with laws and rules and regulations and PICs and notice of everything. And I'm guessing back in the 70s, the early 80s, there was none of that, was there?
No, nothing at all. Nobody had a cell phone. Nobody had emails. It was long before the internet. And all the property managers had to come around and they carried the coins in their purse or in their pocket, and you had to have coins for the telephones on the corner, the telephone booths. So
I
you
remember
really
I remember some of that from
communicated
when I was a
by
kid.
pagers or something of that nature. Um, we a cell phone. Nobody had car phones then. This was just one of those things that you would say, "Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it." Oh, my pager ran out of batteries. Oh, we'll get to it. So sometimes it wasn't as um, instantaneous as it is today, but we did have some good responses because you had to be sharp. You
Well,
had
you
to
when
be
you have a
sharp.
flood, you have a flood. I mean, a flood in the 70s is the same as a flood today. I imagine you'd get a call on your landline from, someone at the building. You'd run over there in your wagon or horse-drawn whatever it is, and you
Well,
would you would deal with it.
yeah, we
You
would
would send
always
a
have.
carrier pigeon to the plumber, and they would come running.
Well, the
Um,
property manager had to have a pair of rubber boots in the trunk of his car so he could go and find out which pipe was leaking. No,
I
I'm
mean,
just
that's still kind of the case, isn't
joking.
it?
No,
Um,
um, I would have to say because it evolved from the rental industry, there were a number of people who tried to go from rentals to condos and they went back to rentals. They didn't like it as all because in those days we had this new thing called the board of directors. So the property manager was subservient to the board. They had to have the contract. The manager knew that the board was like their boss.
yeah.
Whereas in rentals, you had one boss, you could control what was going on. So a lot
Yeah,
of
you had one.
managers were disappointed with the transition.
Well, it's definitely tough to have five bosses per building and have a portfolio of buildings versus one businessman running the whole thing. Absolutely. Um, so like today, when we're managing today, everyone listening to this knows what it's like. You're constantly connected. You have email going off nonstop, hundreds a day sometimes. You typically have, a couple boards have put a WhatsApp group together, so you're connected through there. You're getting text messages, you're getting calls wherever you are. It just, I guess back then that just wasn't the case. You'd sit down, there were no computers. So what was your day like? Describe a day for me.
Well, a day was usually checking with the superintendents because property managers were a step above superintendents, and people looked at managers as, oh, you graduated from being a superintendent. And the salaries in those days were not much higher than the superintendent. You didn't have to live in the building, but you almost had to be there 24/7. You were
Hmm.
responsible for a portfolio, but you also had an understanding that your job was always on the edge. They could replace you in 15 minutes because there weren't a lot of property managers who were willing to do this thing called condo. Oh,
Hmm.
you have a condo. So some people didn't understand that there are condos that were townhouse condos, there were high-rise apartment condos, and people thought that condos were only the high-rise ones. They didn't know about townhouses, and they even had some commercial condos in those days as well. So the average day started off early in the morning because you had to check in with the superintendent, you had to do your regular inspections, you had to check in with head office. There was a number of items that had to be inspected, but it was pretty much the day-to-day thing that you had to handle. It wasn't just handling emergencies. You had to talk to people. And some managers who used to be superintendents didn't like to talk to people.
That's tough at this job.
That's true.
Um, yep. And I imagine again, I'm not familiar with the previous Condo Act before 1998, but you still had AGMs, you still had board meetings, um, nothing virtual, of course. So tell me, how did the AGMs work? And
Well,
and I guess we know because we still do some live AGMs, but different proxy form.
differently. We had the great idea of a proxy was one single page, and you had the owner sign it, and he managers in those days could collect them to try and get a quorum. Nowadays, oh, it's difficult. People are saying, no, you're forging. There's 14 pages in a proxy. You don't have CAO to try and tell you how to use and fill out the proxies. It was a lot easier. Can you come to the meeting? No, I can't. I don't. I did. I went last year to the meeting and everybody was screaming and yelling, I'm not going again. It was pretty much the same type of thing. Or some days in some condominiums, they would entice the boards of directors to say, we're going to fund a dinner. And they would have people come to the AGMs. I remember going to one AGM. Oh my goodness, it was a long time ago. And right now, that community center is now a 40-story building with a condominium. But this was in a big condo. It had 440 units. And the president of the board was on the stage. It was in an auditorium, very nice. There were a lot of people there. And at the end of the general meeting, one unit owner said, I'd like to speak to the owners here, and I'd like to approach. And of course, you had a microphone at the front. He steps up to the microphone and he says, I'd like to give one message to the president. He turns over and punches the president in the face. Of course, the police
Oh,
arrested him, and that was the end of the meeting. So we had a quick adjournment.
I mean, that sounds very modern. That doesn't sound like something that wouldn't, that would still happen today. It's just we have virtual to protect ourselves.
That's
But
right.
wow. Um,
But the meeting was you had to do all paper notices for the AGM. There was no preliminary notice, so you only had to give 15 days notice. In those days, it was more like 10 days. And of course, collecting proxies was fun. A lot of times the auditors would show up, and sometimes you would have a solicitor being the chairman or the president would be the chairman. It was interesting.
yeah, well,
And
it's
of course,
interesting about
people would always complain, as in current situations, how come you didn't have more cookies or more coffee?
yeah, so the past wasn't actually that much different. This sounds thoroughly modern.
Yeah.
The, the main thing, I guess, is like you said about the notice. So the Condo Act now has, the pre-notice and the notice, all this. Before 2000, was there a notice period for an AGM, or was it just at the manager's discretion?
You had to give 10 days notice.
10 days, which is not a lot, especially as it's a paper notice. You're mailing it to people. They may be on vacation or away. Not like today where again everyone's connected by email all the time and you have 40 days notice. And I guess the Condo Act that came out because there were problems with the previous one. Everything in the act usually is developed out of something that went wrong or something that came up. So
Well,
a little more Wild West back then, I guess.
yeah, before that, this is, as I can remember, before they had these new regulations in 2017, the preliminary notice, there was nothing. It was just hey, save the date. People would say,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to run for the board of directors. So how do I put my name in so that I can get elected at the AGM? And managers and boards would send out, oh yeah, we're thinking of that. If you'd like to run, please submit your name. So this sort of save the date notice became the preliminary notice, and it was incorporated into the regulations and the laws. But it was just the proper way of getting people. Not everybody wanted to. And there was an old story, of course. How do you get more people to run for the board of directors? You have a number of people lined up at a standing, waiting in a line, and you'd say, all those people who want to run for the board, step forward. And of course, everybody stepped back. So those people left standing are the ones who got inadvertently ordered to be on the board of directors. It
I
was
gotta
fun.
try that.
It
Yeah,
was
I'm gonna
an
try that
interesting
one.
one. I remember one that was down on, I'm going to say, I think it was on Dundas Street. They had a hotel. It was an annual general meeting, and they actually had a sit-down formal dinner, and this was paid by the condominium. So a lot of the owners would come to the meeting. They didn't want to miss the free dinner, supposedly, because they paid through their condo fees. So they had about a 97% turnout, which was great. And the board did their right job. They had a chairman, a solicitor. It was all formalized, like a beautiful dinner. Everybody showed up in formal black tie. It was excellent, excellent concept. So it's a nice idea to have that as an enticement to come out to the board of directors or
Yeah,
to
it's
the
it's
AGM. Excuse me. Yeah.
it's interesting. I remember early in my career the live AGMs, and now of course most of not all, but most are virtual or sometimes hybrid, but most are virtual now. And I remember a funny one where a small building, 20 something units, but very, very high end, and all Italian. No one spoke English. We got to the AGM. It was one of our first buildings, and the president of the board stood up, spoke for about 10 minutes in Italian, while the auditor and myself kind of looked at each other saying, "What the hell's going on?" Smacked the table a few times, got really upset, and then said, "Okay, let's eat." And everyone just ran off and ate. And we're like, are we done? What happened?" And so I think we were done. I think that was the AGM. I have no idea what happened, but it was done. And I miss those because it is, it's a lot of work going to the AGMs, but it is a lot of fun, and you get a different, it's richer when you're in person than it is virtual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Um,
had them in many places. I had one AGM that was for a townhouse property, and it was in I would say, the parking lot outside. Fortunately, it didn't rain that night, and so it was difficult to keep count of who was part of the quorum and who people were leaving and coming back. So it was hard to keep track of the attendance.
yeah, the dogs would, I guess, not count, and the people walking by. But if you needed quorum, you could just, sort of waylay someone walking by and say, "Hey, you're part of this condo now, and we need you.
Yes.
Just stay here." Um, so yeah, a lot has changed, and it sounds like a lot hasn't changed when it comes to personalities and directors being punched in the face and all that. That sounds thoroughly modern. Uh, but a lot has changed in terms of regulations, and of course the way we do things. Just curious, when today we get notices. I'll get a notice. I'll get a call on my cell phone from a manager saying, "Hey, we have a problem. We need to shut down the water. We need notice sent to everyone." Either someone at my head office, or if they're able to and not running around, they'll send a notice by email. Everyone will get the notice. The water's shut off. It's instantaneous. How did dealing with emergencies work? in a situation where you had to post notices on floors? How did you tell people what they needed to know in those scenarios?
Well, those scenarios can still be arranged because some people and some of the, I'm going to say the elderly people living in a condo don't necessarily look at their emails or their cell phones as often as some of the younger people.
This
So
is
we would
true.
still have some posting notices, and that's all you can do. You say, hey, we do a lot of apologies. Sorry you didn't see the notice that we're washing the garage that was posted all over,
Yeah.
but sometimes you have to stop and look at the notice boards, or we post them in the elevators or other places. But in reality, we would be running around and handing notices and putting them in the front doors, putting them in a mailbox. We actually had mailboxes in all the townhouses. The high rises were a little easier because the superintendent would be given the job, go floor to floor and put these on everybody's door.
Yeah. Now, and I have some memories of when we first started. It was the same idea as just walking around the building over and over again, putting notices on people's doors or whatever. And I think it was nice because you actually did walk the building more back then. When you're able to sit at a laptop and fire off an email, you don't really get the same personal interaction or the same view of the building. I'm constantly reminding my managers, go do your walkarounds. That wasn't necessary back then because we were always walking around. We had to. We were always talking to people.
Yeah, this is true, and it's certainly one way to stay limber and keep the weight down. But by the same token, it was the type of thing that you would want to do. You had a friendlier atmosphere than now the manager, because before you'd say the manager, he's there, he's here. I want to talk to the manager. What is it that you'd like to talk to the manager about? Well, I got this notice from CRA and I don't know what happened with my taxes. Can you help me? So when you personally have that interaction, it helps with the other items that you want to do. Sorry that we had to raise the condo fees, but we're trying to help you any way we can. And if you can have that atmosphere that you want to be on the team, it's a much better concept. Years ago, they would treat managers and only pay managers a notch above a superintendent. For many, many years, we wanted to get to be the level of a profession. We are now professional. You have to have an RCM. You have to have a license from the CMRAO. But in those days, you just needed to have a pair of shoes and a smile on your face, a pen in your hand, and go around. You would also have to go and meet with the directors so that they could sign checks. Sometimes there would be an emergency, so you would have to go at night and see the president or the treasurer and knock on the door and say, sorry about this, but this gentleman needs a deposit before we have the contractor fix the back parking lot, something of that nature. So those types of interactions were helpful because the president or the treasurer would also say, I noticed that Freddie next door knocked down one of the parking signs. So by the way, can you fix that? So those little things help out. The other thing that I've noticed, which is a little bit easier when you have the interaction from before and you can talk to people, an email is always one way. It's only one-way communication. So what did you mean by that concept? Or nowadays, AI has some spelling corrections. So did you really mean that four-letter word that was in that email? So
It
we
was
have those
ChatGPT, I
problems as well.
swear. I
Sorry.
didn't say that. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because you're kind of describing society as a whole really was, I think, a little bit more social and a little bit well, yeah, a little bit more social before everyone moved to technology. You were forced to talk to people face to face, read body language, and you're absolutely right. When you send an email, it's one way, and people do sometimes misread what you write, which is different than when you speak to them. So I've had people send me horrible emails, and then I pick up the phone and call them. I'm like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, I misunderstood," and
Yes.
so I think it's kind of nice that human interaction. And you're right, you lose weight when you have townhouses and go up and down stairs all the time. So I appreciated that from way back.
That's,
Um, but
that's
that's
awesome.
really interesting. It's quite a different job. In terms of the pay, yeah, I'm happy the pay has gone up that much relative to to superintendents and concierge. I think it had to. It's it's a difficult job.
It is. And in general terms, things actually start moving along. I'm certainly happy of your efforts and ACMO's effort to raise the price for status certificates. In those days, it was $50 and there was nothing else. And then we finally raised it up to 100. But that took a lot of effort over several years between, I think, 78 and 2001. It was $50 for a status certificate.
Yeah, which
And then
is
they kept
wild.
adding more things to it, but it was only a one-page. Oh, the owner paid his condo fees, and there's no lawsuits. That was a very simple status certificate.
Right. I guess it wasn't a prescribed form before a certain point, right?
That's right. It was called an estoppel certificate.
Yep. Yeah, it still is for co-ownerships.
Yes.
But yeah, the amount of liability you're opening yourself up to though is, if somebody buys a place and something's not disclosed, but I guess again, the market itself was much, much smaller. There just weren't, there
Yeah.
wasn't 100,000 condos floating around.
Yeah. So, and again, in the, I guess in the 90s and 80s, the corporation only had to have one bank account. After 2009, the Condo Act changed in 1970, 1998, etc. We had to have a separate bank account for the reserve fund. So there was a lot of easy way of writing it. We never had to have, you had to keep track of the reserve fund, but it wasn't mandatory to have two bank accounts. So it was a lot easier on administration and less cost to the corporation.
Right. Just write a check from your bank account and track it that way.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it sounds much simpler, much, much simpler. And of course, no PICs, no,
Oh, none
your
of that.
proxy wasn't 6 pages long. You didn't have your new owner information certificates, your ICUs, none of that. It was, post a notice when something changes.
Yes.
And I
You
guess
didn't have,
the system got abused and they felt they needed to regulate it.
yeah, you didn't have to notify CAO about change in the board of directors. So
No, there was no CAO.
there was
Your
no
board was your
CAO.
board. Yeah, that's right. And your
And
bylaws were
the
whatever they
managers
were.
only had to pay ACMO. They didn't have to pay CMRAO for their license.
That's right. Yeah,
So
if you wanted the RCM, remember that was voluntary as well. You could start a company,
yes,
and if you had the clients, you could do it. That's actually how our company started. We decided to get into this because of a building we were managing, self-managing, and no licensing, no requirements. We just got up and went. And it wasn't for years that they introduced licensing, and we realized, hey, this would never have worked in today's era.
yeah. Some of those times that I can recall, a small little office above a commercial building at Kiel and Wilson was where ACMO's office used to be, and they started off with just a little newsletter, and now it's grown to this fantastic magazine that we get regularly. And thank you for all your
Yeah.
inputs and articles that people put in for it. But it was an interesting time where we would have luncheons at hotel at Kiel and Wilson, and the I would call it the annual convention was very small. There was maybe 20 or 30 booths. That's all there was for ACMO when we had our conventions that we had. It was
Well,
interesting
the
stories for people. We worked for a large company, one of the largest in Southern Ontario, who was managing a number of condominiums. Actually, it was called Westwood. And at one point, the president of Westwood was also the president of ACMO. And after a number of years, that company, for whatever reason, went bankrupt. So all the managers were now scrambling to try and find a way to make sure there was enough management for each one of their clients. It was
right.
interesting how that scrambled. A couple of other people picked up the contracts, and other management companies evolved over time. It was fun. It was different then. You never knew what was going to happen the next day.
Well, it's a very different world when you have, a few hundred condos instead of, thousands and thousands, and you have,
Yes.
unlicensed. No, there was no licensing, so it's hard to say unlicensed, but anyone could be a manager, typically superintendents who have evolved out of that role and into the manager's role. But it's it makes for a very different sort of industry. And yeah, it's grown exponentially. It's really gone crazy, especially in the last 10 years as all these new condos have gone up.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, I'd say, but different, much different, more
Yeah,
different. Yeah.
if they built a building, it was usually standalone. Sometimes they would have a shared facility between two towers, but that was it. They didn't have commercial on the bottom and hotel on the top. Those things are just new entities that have evolved over the economy now. That
Well,
we'll see what's
they've
happening.
happened. I wouldn't say that they've happened with much thought behind them. And I did a podcast already, which has already come out on shared facilities, but the level of complexity that some of these condos bring with them these days, especially in the major cities, is just out of this world. Like you'll have shared facilities on top of shared facilities with amendments, hotels, mixed use, all in one sort of bucket. And you need a PhD just to figure out who owns what. But way back when, it really wasn't like that. You had a building was a number of, it was like an apartment building. It was a number of units, usually on a plot of land, and that was the condo. That was it. A lot easier to manage those.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so really yeah, it's just remarkable. And I think you touched on the best point, which was just the social aspect of it having changed. And I can say for myself between, when was it? 2011 when I started our company and now, the difference is amazing. I spend most of my time, I do go to sites a lot, but I spend most of my time on a computer right now, sending emails, sending notices, working on spreadsheets, all that kind of stuff. When we first started, I was running door to door often, putting notes on doors, calling people, visiting board members to sign checks, and it was a richer experience. You got a lot more personal touch to the
Yeah.
management, I guess.
Years ago, when ACMO first started, we had a real camaraderie with the people who were involved on the board of directors. We actually had sample contracts that were helping new people. We were enticing people into the industry. You say, come on and be a condo manager. Here, we'll help you get started with your own company or etc. I don't know if that type of help exists anymore.
Well,
It
we're enticing
was
people to get
interesting,
into
but
the
you can join a
industry as,
company. Yeah, you can
yeah, we're
join a
enticing
company.
people to get in as managers, but as company owners, it's much more, it's very difficult now with licensing to just get up and start a company. Um,
True.
Very difficult to do that now.
Hmm. Yep.
So,
It
um, well, I think that's almost time.
okay.
It's really interesting just to hear where the whole thing kind of came from. When you look at it today, it's complex. It's very complex. There's a lot to it. We have all sorts of organizations with different acronyms that do different things, ACMO and CAO and CMRAO and CCI and whoever else. And it's interesting to see where it all kind of came from. And we're going to be doing another episode to pair with this one, which is going to be about the future of condo management. So we wanted to, sort of say, where did things come from and where are things going to go? And I don't think I could have picked a better guest than you, Richard. Just having done this for this long, you were a past president of ACMO. You sort of got into this at the beginning. Like I said, before your time, it was really rentals and co-ownerships. There just wasn't a condo. So, it's interesting to hear how you and the people around you at the time kind of made it up as you went and figured things out as needed. Um, Very interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, well, we had a long term and you have to survive. And I think that's important in condo management because in itself, you never know what the world is going to throw at it. Most people who are going to hear this podcast know that they survived through the pandemic and it was a tough road, but now we have to go through into this new thing. Thank you very much, Mr. Trump, for tariffs. We'll find how that impacts our economy and the condo world.
Yep, tariffs, AI. There's all sorts of new things being thrown at us, and almost at an accelerating pace. So hard to say what will come, but we can kind of see the trends. We can probably predict we're going to have more regulation, not less. We're going to have more technology. It's going to be less social, unfortunately. but you never know exactly what kind of curveballs you're going to get, do you?
No, no,
Well,
that's true.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on. I thought that was a really great show and really interesting. And I appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Anytime. Looking forward to our next convention.
Absolutely. All right. Take
Thank
care.
you.